The pawn is the soul of the game, said several hundred years ago legendary chess player Philidor. And up to date, this piece of chess wisdom, chess truism stands very much true and in fact is still one of the core ideas of our game. Yet, it seems to me that despite of this eternal wisdom, a lot of players, in particular low-level, club-level players, seem to disregard this little piece of wisdom, or perhaps more accurately put, they don't exactly understand what it means and how they could integrate this idea into their game. So in today's video, I'm going to show you a couple of ideas and a couple of concepts that revolve around pawn moves, hopefully to support your understanding a little bit better about what kind of responsibilities and what kind of ways of thinking should you consider when you are making certain changes in your structure. As we know, speaking of structures, pawns create the backbone, the skeleton of the vast majority of middle game scenarios, and these pawn structures are the direct signposts that show us which way to go and how to go about our business on the chessboard. Now, when we are making pawn moves, in particular pawn breaks, we tend to not to think about the fact that if we change the position in terms of structure, if we aim for a pawn break, that is going to fundamentally, brutally actually, change what is going on the board, and it's likely going to cause a greater change in terms of plans, strategy, evaluation than any other trade could actually do the same. So when we are moving pawns and create tension between pawns, it really does need very thorough calculation and consideration, because once again, the whole entire game and structure is going to be sort of rewritten from scratch, and we really need to be ready for the new situation. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. This game, or rather this position, occurred in a student's game. We are white, and in order to participate well in this exercise for you, dear viewer, I would recommend you to consider two things before we carry on. First, try to establish with white to move who is better and why, and then two, what do you think white should do? Once again, it is white to move, so obviously we would want to figure out what's going on. And I will give you some time now, pause the video if you would like to engage with this. I am now going to carry on. And I'm going to tell you that white is clearly better here. All right, so that goes without saying. And the number one reason is actually structural. These two pawns are both very weak and easy to target. And black is also struggling a little bit with completing development. And last but not least, this g7 bishop is a miserable, absolutely, utterly miserable piece. And to some degree, I need to add that as a result of the wrecked pawn structure, black is badly lacking a good plan. Now, all this considered, now we move on to question 2, which is, what should we do here? And that is quite a difficult question, really, unless we are somewhat familiar with, at least basic, rather intermediate strategic ideas. But since I already highlighted to you that these two are the major weaknesses, that sort of indicates that we should be playing on the queen side. So it's center/queen side. And then we realize that black actually does have a semi-threat, which is knight c5. And so these two things combined sort of open our eyes up to ideas around the queen side. One more thing I forgot to mention about evaluation, that if there was one thing that we really disliked about our position as white, is that the e2 knight is utter garbage. We would really love to have it on f3, and unfortunately it's not there, but this is what we have, so now we need to work with this story. But that means that in the back of our mind, we're also thinking about rerouting, the e2 knight somewhere. Now, dealing with knight c5 is simply happening by knight a2, and after bishop b7, white has got many very good moves here. The position is really tempting, but simply just building it up is the best you can do. Just build it up. Rook d1, queen c7, defend or fortify the pawn on e4, remove the queen from the pin, and slowly but surely build up an attack on these 2 pawns. It's going to include the bishop coming back to e3, the knight coming to b4, potentially the bishop coming to b5, utilizing the pin, and slow and steady is going to win the race. What happened instead was that we really wanted to breathe some life into this position. There is plenty, by the way, as I showed you, but it's just a slow and steady game. Not that that is by any means a negative statement to make about any position. You can't go for a checkmate attack in every single game. But here we considered the idea of f4, and after not too long thinking, we actually settled for it and we did play f4. And now you understand why I had the big intro about pawn moves and structures and the whole yada 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 about pawn moves. So how do we evaluate f4? And perhaps this is the move that you voted for when I asked you about evaluate and what's the move. f4 is an absolutely terrible move here. In fact, nothing short of a positional blunder. And now the position just completely turns on its head, and from what was clearly better for white, we are headed, in fact we already are there, to a position where black is clearly better. So what is so bad about f4? First and foremost, let's establish the most important thing. What does it do? Nothing, right? So what it does is that it opens up the f-file, and it opens up this diagonal, and it opens up the e5 square. These are all things, in case the pawns get traded, yeah? But since we are offering a trade, we must reckon with the fact that it gets taken. So what happens after ef4, which is, by the way, by no means black's best, but it's actually a really good move. Let's have a look. So now we opened up the bishop's diagonal, thus making the absolute worst piece on the board prior to our move the absolute best. This bishop is now an absolute monster that is dominating the dark squares in the center. Secondarily, we have created an isolated pawn for ourselves, which is going to be promptly blockaded by a knight on e5, allowing a second absolutely awesome piece for black to have, which they could have never ever done if we hadn't played f4. So insofar, what we have established is that we donated 2 absolutely marvelous pieces to black for no return. Now, as a result of the e4 pawn being blockaded, both of these pieces are sitting ducks that do nothing at all because their potential pathways have been very badly restricted by our own pawn, and there is not a lot of stuff to be done anymore on the queen side because the events now have accelerated in the center and the king side, and we will have actually threats to attend to, such as queen b6, knight g4, and the likes. And finally, right now, as a result of all of the above, we also badly ran out of logical plans to play for. Now, what's on the flip side of this coin? What white has that is great? Well, we managed to crank the f-file open. That's it. Which is totally useless, by the way. And that's irrespective of how we take back on f4. Even if we take back with the queen, even h6 is just a very simple move to sort out the problem. What we also need to notice, by the way, here when we get obsessed with the idea of, oh, let's open up the f-file. Well, in order to do that, or rather after doing that, we are obviously eyeing with this pin, right? Which is an asset. I'm not going to deny that. It's an asset. But we are trying to break black on the square that right now in this position, he's controlling with the largest number of pieces. You cannot find another square on the board right now that black covers with more pieces than f6. So the mere idea that we want to hurt them there, where they are best prepared to defend without having to make a single move, is entirely ludicrous. And indeed, after f4, we went on to lose rather quickly. Queen b6 check, knight g4. This is actually a mistake. I will come back to that in a second. We played bishop h4 to defend against the threat that wasn't the threat. And after ef4, black correctly stirred the structure back to where he should have gone initially. And now with all these superior minor pieces and the ugly isolated pawn, we went on to lose rather quickly, actually. No, maybe not that quickly. Yeah, I think they missed the knight b2 trickery here somewhere. Yeah, right here. Knight b2, rook b2, knight d3, knight d3, bishop c3, and it would have been all over. So the reason why I said that this was not a threat and this was another blunder is because here actually tactics would have helped for white if they had played f5, which is, by the way, again, an almost instinctive gut reaction that when your opponent plays knight f4 and you have a chance to avoid this trade that would bring these two alive, an exchange is no price whatsoever to pay for this. And I would be happily playing this position with white even if we did not have a forced draw as a worst case scenario, because now again black is really badly struggling to find a plan here with the very poorly placed minor pieces. But unfortunately, like I said, the structure did change and we went on to lose as a direct result of that. So what I'm trying to tell you with this is that even if a pawn break is making you feel like, oh yeah, that's the dynamic way, that's how I'm gonna bring my pieces alive, you really need to consider how you are changing the structure and how that actually impacts not only your pieces but theirs. Because here it's crystal clear that f4 only impacts one white piece, and that's the f1 rook, and that's all. And it seems that in turn it actually brings the whole entire black army into the game, in particular the knight and bishop, and the weakness of the dark squares is just an extremely high price to pay for this f4 break. So yeah, this is definitely something to consider. And by the way, this happened in a rapid game between two 2200s. So it's not like, you know, I'm sourcing here my material from games where two 1100s had a go at each other. This happens a lot on reasonably high level chess. So it's well worth considering and spending some time on just to polish your positional chess. I will show you another example which I find even more striking. Although the evaluations are a little bit off from what I would really like to be, but I think the example is going to be nonetheless very interesting and hopefully useful for you. This is black to move, and black here decided to push one of these pawns. My challenge to you before I reveal the goodies would be to decide which pawn would you push and why. Alright, that's it. And there are other good moves, by the way, for black, to be fair. So by no means are we restricted to pushing one pawn or the other. Queen a5 is a very sensible move. There are probably several others, rook b8 perhaps. But because we are talking about pawn pushes and structural changes, I want you to engage with this concept. So pause the video now if you would like to figure out a few things. In the game, actually, I slightly altered the position from the game where I got this from. Student played d5. And it's quite amazing that the reasoning behind d5 was just such a compelling thing for me to listen to, because I'm like, wow, I just saw that coming. And as soon as he showed me d5, I am like, yeah, nah. But I didn't say any of that. I'm just like, okay, I'm curious to see where this is going. So I'm like, why did we go there? He goes, well, I wanted to secure the e4 square. Okay. So I'm like, aren't we fixing the whole pawn structure on the wrong color? It's like, yeah, I guess. Okay, so we then had a look at this position with something like knight d7, queen e3, and by now, and bishop e4 was winning there on the spot, I told him that, doesn't this look like a textbook case of a good knight, bad bishop scenario, where we put every single pawn on white that was our doing in order to make this bishop the worst minor piece in history of chess. In contrast, by playing d5, we also gave the e5 square to the opponent. So that's the knight right there, which actually we can't kick a piece out once the knight is traded for the bishop. So here now we already need to backpedal and play knight d7 and hope for the very best. But even then the structure is definitely not favoring us. Now, when I showed him the position and I proposed the idea of c5 if any pawn push, then came another concept that everyone gets wrong below a certain level, and that was that I didn't like it because d5 was a tempo on my bishop. And it's very difficult for me to explain this. Like, I don't really know the right analogy or how to put it to you, but the bottom of my message to you is that this is not a tempo, because this is not a move that you would want to play. So if you play a move that forces your opponent to do something that they are not meant to do, that usually we consider to be a tempo, right? In order to demonstrate this point to you, I'm going to open up a analysis board, because I want, this is an important point. So in this position, knight c3 is a tempo, and the reason why it's a tempo is because even if in this position they played blah, I would want to play knight c3. That's where it wants to go. So if I get to do it while attacking something, and so it has to move, and then I can do another move, then it's okay. Awesome. That's a tempo, because that's something we wanted to do, and now we got to do it whilst gaining a move. There is value gained. This is the core message I want to tell you with this. Value gained. That equals when you talk about a tempo. Now, pushing d5 here is a tremendous amount of value lost from white's point of view, because now we lost control of the e5 square. Our pawn structure got rigid on white. So we are actually doing a tremendous amount of positional damage to ourselves whilst we are kicking a piece out. I don't like to call it a tempo. I like to call it committing positional suicide whilst having fun with kicking a piece. Not exactly great. Now, note the huge difference here. After d5, we play bishop g4, and if they are carelessly playing a move like rook e1, now we take their knight with our bishop, and then we occupy the outpost that we have created for ourselves on e5. Now you see how miserably horrid the pawn push was to come to d5, giving up the e5 square. And the whole story is totally on its head. We did a full 180, because now it's black having an amazing knight on an outpost and white is having a total garbage bishop. Instead, in the game, the exact opposite happened. We played d5, this knight came in, this knight got traded for the bishop, and we ended up absolutely miserable in that position. And all this, all of it, came down to one pawn move. So when you hear that the pawn is the soul of the game, you shouldn't just think that, yeah, whatever, if I get to the end, I get a queen, awesome. No, what it means is that any pawn move, in particular in middle games and in particular central pawn thrusts, usually change the character of the position rather dramatically and drastically. And we need to be very well aware of the consequences, the pros and cons, before we actually make a move like this, because all of a sudden, what appeared to be a no-brainer actually turns out to be a lemon, and the one next to it would have been much better. So I hope that this was quite educational and inspiring. I am intending to elaborate on this topic a little bit deeper, but these two examples were both rather recent, so whilst they were fresh in my mind, I decided to put the content out there. I hope you guys liked it, and I will be back with more. Thanks for watching.